So far we've been able to figure out how to get an element, and then we can do several things with it. We're able to use .value to get the value of a text box. That also works on a variety of elements. We've been able to use .inner HTML, which allows us to write between the opening and closing tags of an element. And we've been able to do .add event listener, which lets us add a listener to any element that we want to get. So today we're going to learn about other things that we can change. So we can change the style of an element. We can change the value of an attribute of an element. And so a couple of more things that we can do. So here's the page. And what we want to do is when we do focus on this text box, we want the label to change. So we're going to change the style of the label when it's on focus. Well, there's a couple of things we're going to learn to do. Notice that there are 3 of these. So we are going to add an event listener. We want to do it on load, and on load it's calling this function add listeners. So I'm just going to add it in this function that I want it to get elements. I want it to get, so far we've only used getElementById, but there's a few other ways that we can get elements. And this one we're going to use right now is called getElements. And notice that's an S. We're going to get more than one. getElementsByTagName. Now the tag name is actually the HTML tag name, and the one we want to get is input. So each of those text boxes are in an input tag, and we want to get all of those. And now when we do this, we are going to get several of them. In this case, we're going to get 3, but you'll end up getting as many as there are on the entire page. So I'm going to store these in a variable called text boxes equals that, and it's going to return more than one. So if I want to add an event listener to each of them, I'm going to have to loop. So I'm going to use a for loop. And this may be the first time you've seen a for loop in JavaScript, but it looks just like a for loop in many languages. I'm going to first create the variable I, set it equal to 0, and then I'm going to go as long as it is. And to figure out how many there are, I'm going to use the length property. So JavaScript has a length property on lots of different objects, including an array. So textboxes.length will tell me how many elements were returned. So then I can use that size to decide how many times to do this loop. And then I'll just simply increment I by 1. And then inside this for loop, I get 1 element at a time. And I can access that element by doing text boxes I, and I can add an event listener to this element. Now the event that I want to access is the focus event, and I'm going to go ahead and write a function called change label. All right, that's what I want to do, is I want to add that event listener. So here, I'm going to go ahead down here and create this function. And in here, I want to be able to change the label that goes with the text box. So here I have a text box, and here's the label that goes with it. So to be able to access, I'm going to add an ID. And I'm going to have the ID be equal to this ID. Remember, you can't have 2 that are the same. You want all the IDs to be unique. So I'm going to do pet label. So it'll match kind of. And this one I'll do ID equals type label. So it's really just the ID of the text box followed by a label. So this last one will be ID equals age label. All right, so now they have an ID, and over here I want to be able to access that. So I'm going to have to figure out what the ID is. Well, one of the things that we can do when an element triggers an event listener, when that function is called by the event, we actually have access to the element that's where the event occurred. So in this case, we'll have access to the text box because that's where the event occurred, that focus event. And the way we have access to it is with the keyword this, and that's again the element that has where the event has occurred. So I can say this.id, and that will return for me. There's lots of properties you can get once you have an element. So I can say this.id will tell me the ID property of the element where the event occurred. So it's going to be pet or type or age. And what I want to do with that is concatenate label to it. And that will tell me what the label ID is. So I'm going to store that in a variable. The label ID is equal to this element's ID plus label. Now I can use that ID to get an element. So I'm going to just use document.getElement. This time I'm going to use by ID, the one we know. And then I'm going to put that variable label ID in there because that's a string that will do that. And now that I got that element, I am going to change the style. And the way we do style is we do .style. And then we have to tell it which property. And so to do that, we do .property. So if I want to change the color, the text color, the property for text color is color. And I want to change it. So I need to put this value in quotes. And since it's going to be a number, I for sure want to put my pound sign. It has to look exactly like the value of the property would be in the CSS file. What color do I want? Well, let's go see. I want choose one of my colors in my style. So I'm going to change it to this color. And let's see what happens now. I refresh this. I send my focus on a text box, and there, it changed the style of that element. If I focus on this text box, it changes this style. And if I focus on this one, it changes that. Now notice, when I leave focus, it doesn't automatically change back. What happens is it calls the event when it gets on focus, and it made that change, and then that change persists until something else changes it. So it's working just like I want, almost. I want it to be able to change back when when I leave focus. So I'm going to add another listener to the same text boxes, and I'm going to do it in the same loop, but this time I'm going to add an event listener for the event blur. That's when you lose focus. And I'm going to call a function called change label back. All right, so that's just another function that we can call. And I'm going to write that function down here. Okay, that's weird. Not sure why that did that. Change label back. All right, now again, I need to get this label again, right? And so I can just do exactly the same thing where I use this .id and concatenate label to it. And then I can get that document, so just like I did up here. But now I'm going to change it back to the original color, which is black. So now let's refresh the page. When we get focus, it changes the color. And when we leave focus, it changes it back to black. So there you go. There's lots of different style properties. You can change any of the style properties that you have access to. There's a little difference with some of them though. So we need to always get to change the style. We need to get the element that we want to change the style on, and we do .style, and then we do the property. So let's consider doing the background color. Now in CSS it would look like this, but there are no hyphens in these values. So what we need to do, instead of using a hyphen, use a capital letter. So background color would be this, and we want to set the background color. I'm going to go ahead and pick another color from here. So I can change the background color. Remember, you need to put it in quotes. And you need to use the pound sign. And there's the background color. I can also change lots of things that I can change. So let's go ahead and get that exact same element again. And this time I want to change the font style. Again, this would be hyphenated, but I use a capital letter instead. And I want the font style to equal italic. Okay. So lots of things then change. So let's go ahead and see what this looks like. So I refresh it, and on focus, it changes the color, the background color, and makes it italicized. Want to do the next one? Okay, look, the text is, the color is changing, but the background and the font style is not changing. So I need to move these same things in the change label back function, and I want to change the background color back to whatever it was, which is the background of the body. And I want to change the font style to normal. Okay. All right. And there now we have it changing on focus and on blur. We have events for that. Okay, there are other things that we can change. So you can change style. Another thing we can change is our attributes. So if we look at this paragraph, here has an image. So there's an image element, and it has an attribute src. So we can change that attribute using JavaScript. So here I've got an ID on this one, so I'm able to easily access this image element. So let's see. First I want to put a listener on this element. Let's see how we want this to work. So if we enter the name of the pet, Fred, and what type of pet is Fred? Let's say Fred is a cat, and that's 2 years old. Click there. Okay, so Fred is 2. So when this click event happens, I want to change this image to another one. So what I end up having to do is, we know that we have an event listener for then. It's when this is clicked, right? When that button is clicked, it calls this function myFirst. And so inside this function, oh, I've got this a bit long. Let me go ahead and turn this around. I'm writing this sentence out. But now what I want to do is I want to access this image, and that I can get it by its ID. So I can document dot get element by ID, and this ID is picture. And I want to change one of its attributes. And the way you do that is you just do dot whichever attribute you want to change. So in this case, I want to change the src attribute, and I want to set it to equal, and in quotes I can put whatever. And if you look at this attribute, it's images/pets.jpg. So I want to change it to images/dog.jpg. And let's see what happens. So let's do oh, Sally was my goldfish. What's the dog's name? Tom has a dog that is 3 years old. Click here. So when I click, it changed the src attribute of this of this image, right? So it changed an attribute, and you can change any attribute and give it a new value. So let's do a little bit more detailed. If we enter Sally, we had Fred the cat, and how old's your pet? 2. And when I click on there, what does it do? Is it not doing anything? It's still doing exactly what we said to do. What we told it to do was to set the SRC attribute to dog. Notice that is no change because it's already been set there. We see it happen when we click it like this, and then when we click here, it changes. But now every time we click it, it's still just setting it to that dog. So let's go ahead and give it a few other options. So we can say if, and let's go ahead and get the value. We get it right here, right, from the text box. So we get the pet type. So if pet type is equal to dog, then we want to set it equal to dog.jpg. But else if pet type is equal to cat, then we want to do something different. Then we want to set it to cat. Oops, that's not what I wanted to copy. There we go. I want to set it to cat.jpg. That's not working right. Let me keep trying again. There we go, cat.jpg. And let's do a couple more. Let's see, find out what images I have. Let's see, I have cat, dog, goldfish, turtle. Pets.jpg is the one that it is. So let's go ahead and do, I'm just going to copy this because lots of it's just a repeat. So if pet type is goldfish, then I want to change this to goldfish. If it is turtle, and I want to change it to turtle. Okay. So let's see what happens. So let's go ahead and try Max, who is a turtle, and is 3 years old. Click here. Ooh, it didn't work. Let's see what happened. If pet type is equal to turtle, change the picture to turtle.jpg. Well, everything there looks correct. Oh, you know what? I forgot to refresh. So let's try it again. When you make changes, you got to save and refresh every time. And there it changed to turtle. We can do the cat. And there we get the cat. Okay, now notice how the images are changing size, and that's a little distracting. So let's go ahead and set the size. Now we could do it inside here, right, in this if statement. We could change the style and set the width to a different property, but really I want it to be the same all the time. So this would be a time when I could set that in the, since it's not going to change, it would be a good place to put this in the CSS file. So I just want to set the width on the IMG tag, and this has the only IMG tag that I have in the whole page, so I don't have to specify any special one. So now I'll come back and do this. Whoa, maybe I want that to be height. That looks too small. Let me make that height. All right, now we try the turtle. Fred was the cat. It's 3. And there we get the cat, and notice it's the same size. And now let's do Max. I don't know, turtle, that's 2, and we get that. All right, now what about if we have Walter the snake? Notice it didn't change the picture because we don't have a picture for snake. So let's go ahead and do just a final else. So if we don't not recognize it, let's set, I have an image called unknown. So let's do that. And now if we have Walter the snake, that's 4, we get this unknown image. All right, so lots of things we're able to do. We can change an attribute by getting the element and then dot, put the attribute there, and then whatever value you want that attribute to be. So you can change many attributes. You can also change style, right? So any style property, you always do get the element and do dot style and then the style property. And remember, if it's a hyphen property, you use a capital letter instead. The values need to be inside quotes and look just like they would look in the CSS file. So whatever values are allowed in the CSS file are allowed here. We have used the focus event and the blur event, which we haven't done before, and a new way to get multiple elements. In this case, we got several by doing getElementsByTagName. You can use by class name too. Remember, with classes, you can have more than one, which is different than an ID. And so you might get several of them if you use getElementsByClassName. Again, both of those use an S right there instead of the single. When we do it with by ID, remember that it's getElementByID. And when you get several of them, you have to loop through them and individually add an event listener.